Vision and visibility, the risk of flying blind. Today's flow short topic. Hi, I'm Joshua Barnes, and I am joined by Steve Pereira. This is the first of a series of these live streams that Steve and I have been talking about for a little while now to just kind of get them going and get them setting up. And what we're trying to do with these is to first raise some awareness about the Value Stream Management Consortium. Steve and I are both board members, but Steve has been instrumental from the very beginning. So Steve goes back to the origins, where I think he and Helen Beal were the ones that really helped champion bringing the consortium into existence. So the VSMC exists, and as a member, there's just a lot of wonderful assets that you have available to you. One of them are a lot of blog posts, right? A lot of short to sort of intermediate length articles that have been written. Flowtopia, the conference, all sorts of opportunities to learn. And with that, Steve, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the consortium before we get into our topic today?
Sure. Thanks, Joshua, for having me here and setting this up. I really appreciate the ability to just jump in here and chat with you. It's a privilege, and I love these conversations. And a lot of the content that you'll find in the Value Stream Management Consortium is the result of these conversations on, what is flow in an organizational context? What is flow across an organization? How do we see it? How do we measure it? How do we think about it? How do we talk to other people about it? And that's, I think, the most important aspect of these conversations is getting used to talking about flow in language that people can understand, whether they are practitioners, whether they are auditors, whether they are senior leadership, whether they're partners, or they're coming to value stream management in a digital context from a manufacturing context, or maybe they're bridging that gap or straddling those two worlds. So there's a lot to talk about, and I'm very excited to be talking about it with you.
Excellent. Yeah, and for those of you that are watching this live, feel free if you want to post a comment as far as where you're from. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. Steve is in Toronto, Canada. So
Toronto.
we have a little bit of temperature distance separating us today. A little bit warmer, I think, where I'm at.
Maybe a little.
Yeah, maybe a little. So in the blog post, and we're gonna put a link in the comment section in just a few moments as far as being able to get to both the Value Stream Management Consortium's website as well as directly to the blog post. One of the things, so this was the very first blog post that Steve and Helen had done. And one of the things when I first read this that I always find so interesting is there's a quote in it that talks about value stream management back over 100 years ago, right? And so from a manufacturing perspective, physical product perspective, yeah, it's been around for quite some time. Sometimes in some of these types of discussions, right, you'll hear somebody say, "Oh yeah, isn't that just a bunch of stuff from Lean?" Well, sure, but from a digital product, from a software perspective, we're just not seeing much awareness with this. And so, starting off with this first blog post, right? Some of the things that we see early in the year, and I think we're still sort of early enough where we see a lot of activity, right? But new budgets becoming available because there's so often, annual budgets and annual budgets and annual funding decisions that have been made. And as you get into sort of the discussion that you and Helen had, right, it's about setting a vision and goals. So the first thing that I wanted for Steve to maybe share a little context on is, right, there's a line in there where you say, I actually cringe when I hear about OKRs and KPIs, as do I, depending on the context. So what did you mean by that?
Well, there's a lot there, but I think that, what happy to see a lot of enthusiasm around OKRs and KPIs. I think it's better than nothing. I think it's better than mandates and having plans kind of dropped in your lap. But I do find that it's very difficult for people to uh, leverage OKRs and KPIs. Like, it's very difficult for people to do the reconciliation of, here's the very highest level OKRs that are deployed by leadership, and then it's got to kind of trickle down to all the individual contributors, and the middle management have to kind of reconcile it with the long-term plans that they have been forming, and the leadership tells them that they are empowered to create their own destinies to an extent. They're somewhat autonomous. They're able to manage their own backlogs. And then OKRs come along and say, well, here's the plan now. And don't get rid of the stuff that you had before. Keep finishing that up and make sure all that gets out the door. But now here's a bunch of new priorities, and you also have to do these. And I think that's very challenging to address in a lot of contexts. And not a lot of people, I would imagine, have the confidence to assert themselves and say that, I don't help me understand how this adds up. Help me understand how I can connect these dots in a way that aligns and, make sure that we land the planes in flight and everything else gets off out of the gate, that needs to get out of the gate. That, I think, is very rare in organizations as a dialogue, and informed by principles that help you make those decisions and those trade-offs, and decision filters that help you say, well, we tend to pick this over that, so that makes that decision easy. I find there's a lot of deliberation necessary. There's a lot of agonizing over, well, I need to do both. And it's not just both, it's 10 things. So
Yeah.
really difficult.
And when you're doing both, or you are doing the 10 things, they're all going to be delayed to some degree, right? I mean, that's the other thing. And as you get down a little bit further in the blog post, right? You talk about desired outcomes, which was fantastic, right? And I think the example you use, if you got somebody that wants to reduce or drastically cut like production defects versus another organization that is looking to accelerate time to market, right? Or increase visibility or decrease work in progress, right? What are the things, or what is the thing that would make a bigger impact that we're trying to actually achieve? And then how do we start taking a look at, again, we get this work that's kind of carrying over, but we have all this new stuff that we're being asked to do. And now, which is going to be more important? And we end up with a more dynamic situation. Maybe whoever's sort of yelling the loudest, right? So we're just vacillating, teams are vacillating back and forth in what they're doing, which doesn't help achieve these really overarching outcomes that are important.
Well, one other aspect that I, actually slipped my mind was the fact that these OKRs tend to be kind of quarterly or semi-annually, right? Where, they don't necessarily lend themselves to long-term vision and planning. And they're not often kind of reconciled against the master plan to say, well, is this quarterly set of directives, is it moving us towards where we were headed before, or is it pulling us away from that? And what do we do in that situation?
Yeah, there was an organization that I had an opportunity to go into to do sort of an agility health check, and then just also sort of general recommendations from a VSM principal perspective. And so, it was a big company, and they had publicly published financial statements. So they actually had 6 very, very well crafted things in the notes to their financial statements, right? And one of them was, again, for-profit company. It was like sustainable growth, and there were a whole bunch of things that were sort of packed into that, still at a very high level. And when I asked from with the thought of strategic alignment perspective, like how are these things that I'm seeing, these projects and work that's going on, how do you tie that back to some of that? It was like, well, I don't know, we don't, or we're not asked to,
Right.
right? So there's always that big disconnect. Like maybe at the top there's good awareness of some of those things that are the 2, 3, 5-year horizon types of things that are the big bets, the really important things for a given organization. But boy, if you try and tie some of the work from an alignment perspective, and you go a little bit further down, like, you spend some time with a team and you ask a developer, like, hey, that code you're writing, how does that support like this thing? And it'll be like, what?
Yeah. Well, and you think about this, if we're thinking about this in the lens of vision and visibility, as a result of that difficulty to reconcile, you'll get this kind of like shadow or bimodal activity where you'll have lip service paid to the high level OKRs and goals, right? Where it's like, well, let's put out the watermelon metrics and say everything's fine. And in the background, they're doing their own thing that's completely disconnected. And they're basically checking the box for leadership, but they have their own backlog. They have a bunch of technical debt. They're like, they'll never understand what we have to do. Let's do it. And we'll also make them happy so that they get, stay off our backs, essentially. And then you've just got essentially chaos, because how do you even understand what is happening when everything seems fine from up top, everything seems fine from the bottom, but they never meet in the middle?
Yeah, I love the watermelon metrics, right? Or for those of you that maybe haven't heard that before, because I haven't heard that in a while. But yeah, it's green on the outside and red on the inside, right? And that goes on, unfortunately, far too often. So this first blog post, for all of you out there again watching this live or watching this on replay, again, talks about setting a vision and goals, gets into desired outcomes. Steve has a really nice way of talking about outcomes and value stream mapping. So without going into too much of the blogs, that you guys can kind of read it for yourselves. If you do take us up on the offer or the enticement to read it, after the fact, come back, post a question or post some thoughts, so that we can get a little more clarification from both Steve and possibly from Helen. Next week, we are going to move on to the next blog entry, which is going to be on the benefits of visibility and transparency. Another, especially another one of these overarching goals a lot of times leaderships want. They want more visibility into what's going on, and we can do that in lots of ways. And so we'll touch on some of the highlights of that blog post. Steve, thanks for working to get this finally kicked off. Any parting thoughts for everybody today?
Well, I want to say thank you again. You're the reason this is happening, and I really appreciate that. It makes it very easy for me to join, and I love having these conversations. So I hope that the two of us get to have more of these conversations with new members and the community as it exists today, because there is a lot to talk about.
Yeah. And so that's something maybe we can work in the future as well, is that as we know, we're going to kind of work through just the library of all of the great guidance and content that the VSMC has. If you're out there and you've read one of those blog posts and you'd like to join in on the discussion, connect with Steve and I here on LinkedIn, let us know, and we'll get you into the broadcast booth as it is. And maybe you can share a little bit of your thoughts. In the chat, we've also put a link to the Value Stream Management Consortium. From a membership perspective, there is a really nice discount if you use the code FlowShorts, since that's what this whole series is going to be. And consider what you get out of it from an individual. Even better, treat your whole team, right? Or bring it to, if you're not in the decision-making role, or at least yet, bring it to one of your decision makers, see if you can get your whole company to have access to all the content. And with that, we will see you on the next Flow Short. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.